I'm not taking care of that old witch, my daughter-in-law whispered at my son's funeral, loud enough for me to hear every word through the silence of the church. I kept my eyes on Michael's casket. The polished oak reflected the pale light from the stained glass windows above us, soft blue and red colors washing across the flowers arranged around him. White lilies. His favorite. The scent was too sweet, almost unbearable after 2 straight days of crying relatives and casseroles nobody touched. At 71 years old, I thought I understood grief. I buried my husband 12 years ago after 40 years of marriage. I sat beside hospital beds. I signed paperwork no wife ever wants to sign. But nothing prepared me for standing in front of my son's coffin while his wife discussed me like I was an unwanted piece of furniture. The church pew beneath me felt harder than stone. I folded my trembling hands tighter around the black handkerchief Michael had given me one Christmas years ago. For elegant ladies only, he joked when he handed me the small silver box. He was 33 then, still young enough to believe mothers stayed forever. Vanessa stood 3 feet away near the front row, perfectly composed in a fitted black dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her blonde hair fell in smooth waves over her shoulders, not a strand out of place despite the tears she dabbed delicately throughout the service. She looked beautiful in the way expensive department store mannequins look beautiful. Cold, untouchable, temporary. Beside her stood my granddaughter Grace, stiff and silent in a navy dress, her pale hands clasped tightly together. At 17, she had Michael's eyes. The same quiet sadness lived in them now. "Mom," Grace whispered softly toward Vanessa. "Not now," Vanessa muttered sharply before forcing another broken expression as guests approached to offer condolences. I watched people hug her, bring her tissues, tell her how strong she was. Nobody noticed I was sitting alone at the edge of the pew like an afterthought. Nobody asked if I'd eaten. Nobody asked where I would go tonight. Michael's framed photograph stood near. The altar beside, candles flickering gently under the church air conditioning. He was smiling in the picture, wearing the gray sweater I bought him 3 birthdays ago. He always hated formal photos. Said they made him look like a politician. My throat tightened so suddenly I thought I might stop breathing altogether. 2 weeks ago he'd called me on a Tuesday evening just to ask if I'd planted tomatoes this year. That was the kind of son he was. Busy but thoughtful. The kind who remembered small things. The kind who noticed when your voice sounded tired over the phone. Now all that remained was a photograph and a folded American flag from the memorial display near the entrance. The pastor continued speaking softly somewhere near the altar, but his words blurred together into meaningless sound. Peace, heaven, eternal rest. I heard none of it clearly because Vanessa leaned toward one of her friends again and sighed dramatically. "I swear, Michael worried himself sick trying to take care of everybody," she whispered. "Especially her." Her friend glanced toward me briefly before looking away with visible discomfort. Vanessa noticed. She lowered her voice, but not enough. "I already told the realtor we may need to move fast after this. I can't have her living with us forever." Forever. The words settled heavily inside my chest. Michael had only been buried for 40 minutes. I stared at the white roses resting across his casket and remembered him at 8 years old running through sprinklers in our backyard during an Illinois summer, laughing so hard he slipped in the grass. I remembered him at 16 carrying groceries into the house without being asked because my arthritis was acting up. I remembered him at 45 sitting across from me at Thanksgiving, quietly slipping an extra $20 bill into my purse because he thought I hadn't noticed grocery prices rising. My son was kind. Too kind sometimes. Kind men often married women who mistook kindness for weakness. The organ music began softly as people stood for the final prayer. Vanessa immediately reached for Grace's hand, performing grief for the room again. Grace looked down at the floor instead. Her jaw tightened slightly. Then, for the briefest second, she glanced toward me. There was something frightened in her expression, something unfinished. After the service ended, people slowly filed toward the reception hall downstairs where coffee and sandwiches waited on folding tables covered with white cloth. I remained seated. My legs suddenly felt too heavy to move. One by one the pews emptied until only the immediate family remained near the front. Vanessa finally turned toward me fully for the first time all afternoon. "Evelyn," she said gently, her voice now coated in artificial sympathy. "We should probably talk about arrangements later this week." "Arrangements?" Such a polite word for removing someone from their own family. I nodded once without speaking. Vanessa seemed relieved by my silence. She always had been. As she walked away in her expensive black heels, Grace lingered behind near the end of the aisle. Her eyes darted nervously toward her mother before settling on me again. Then she reached into her coat pocket and clutched something tightly against her chest. 3 days later, Grace knocked on my front door holding an envelope my son hid before he died. For 3 days after the funeral, I barely touched the food neighbors left on my porch. The refrigerator hummed softly through the quiet house, while casseroles sat untouched beneath aluminum foil. Every room felt wrong, without Michael's voice calling to check on me. I woke up each morning expecting to hear his truck pulling into the driveway the way he used to every Sunday after church. Instead, there was only silence and the distant sound of traffic from the main road beyond my subdivision. Rain tapped lightly against the kitchen windows that Thursday afternoon when Grace finally arrived. She stood on my porch wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt and white sneakers soaked dark from the wet pavement. She looked exhausted, not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that settles behind the eyes after too much sadness too quickly. When I opened the door, she held the envelope tighter against her chest before stepping inside. "I told Mom I was studying at Hannah's house," she said quietly. Her voice sounded thin, almost shaky. I closed the door behind her and noticed she kept glancing toward the street through the front curtains. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked softly. Grace nodded too fast. "Dad wanted you to have this if something ever changed." She handed me the envelope carefully, like it might break apart between my fingers. My name was written across the front in Michael's handwriting. Simple blue ink. Slightly slanted letters. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, grocery notes, and Christmas tags for over 40 years. Suddenly my knees felt weak. I sat slowly at the kitchen table while Grace remained standing near the counter. The envelope looked old around the edges, like it had been hidden somewhere for a while. "Where did you find it?" I asked. Grace hesitated before answering. "Dad kept a lockbox in the garage cabinet behind his fishing gear. I only found it because Mom asked me to clean everything out yesterday." Yesterday? My stomach tightened painfully. Michael had not even been gone a full week, and Vanessa was already clearing pieces of him away. I traced my fingers lightly across the envelope, but did not open it yet. Somehow seeing his handwriting again made his death feel fresh all over again. "Did your mother know about this?" Grace shook her head immediately. "No. Dad told me once that if he ever gave me a key and asked me to hide it, I was supposed to remember where it went. He said it was important." Her eyes filled with tears then, though she fought hard not to let them fall. She looked so much like Michael in that moment it nearly stole the air from my lungs. I stood and wrapped my arms around her carefully. She felt smaller than I remembered. "Fragile. You do not have to be afraid here," I whispered. Grace stayed quiet for several seconds before speaking softly against my shoulder. "Mom has been acting strange since the hospital." I pulled back slowly. "Strange how?" Grace looked toward the hallway as if worried someone might overhear us inside my empty little ranch house. "She keeps talking about money. Insurance. Selling the house before fall. She even asked if I wanted to switch schools after graduation because we might move to Arizona." Arizona. Michael hated Arizona. Said the heat made him miserable. Grace swallowed hard before continuing. "And yesterday, I heard her arguing with somebody on the phone about paperwork Dad changed before he died." A cold feeling moved slowly through my chest then. Not panic. Something quieter. Heavier. I looked down again at the envelope resting between my trembling hands. Michael had hidden this before he died. Michael expected something to happen after he was gone. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the dark Illinois sky while rain streaked down the windows beside us. Grace finally sat across from me at the table, folding her hands tightly together exactly the way her father used to during difficult conversations. "Grandma," she whispered carefully, "I do not think Dad trusted Mom anymore." The rain continued most of the afternoon, turning the backyard grass dark and heavy beneath the gray Illinois sky. Grace sat quietly across from me at the kitchen table while the old clock above the stove ticked softly through the silence between us. I finally slid my finger beneath the edge of the envelope and opened it carefully, trying not to damage the paper. Inside was a folded letter and a small silver key taped to the back. My chest tightened the second I recognized Michael's handwriting on the first page. I had to steady myself before reading. "Mom, If you are reading this, something changed faster than I thought it would. I stopped breathing for a moment. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. Grace lowered her eyes while I continued slowly. I need you to trust me even if this letter makes no sense right now. There are things I should have handled sooner. My hands trembled harder with every line. Michael never wrote dramatic letters. He was practical, careful with words. The kind of man who fixed problems quietly without wanting praise for it. Seeing fear hidden between his sentences unsettled me more than grief itself. I know Vanessa has been making financial decisions behind my back for over a year. I tried to believe it was stress at first. Then I found out she opened accounts I never approved. The words blurred briefly as tears filled my eyes. I pressed my fingertips against my forehead and forced myself to continue reading. If anything happens to me, please contact Daniel Mercer immediately. He knows everything. Daniel Mercer. The name sounded familiar for a second before I remembered. Michael's attorney. I had met him once years ago during a barbecue at their house. Quiet man. Thin glasses. Navy suit, even on weekends. Grace watched me carefully from across the table. There is more on the back, she whispered softly. I turned the page over. Mom, I am sorry. I should have protected you better. That line nearly broke me. My son was gone, yet somehow he was still trying to take care of me. I covered my mouth with my hand and stared down at the paper while memories crashed over me all at once. Michael carrying my grocery bags after my knee surgery. Michael fixing my porch light during a snowstorm because he worried I would slip walking outside. Michael calling every Friday evening just to ask if I needed anything from Costco. Love hides itself in ordinary things until suddenly those things disappear. Grace finally spoke again after several quiet moments. Dad and Mom argued a lot this past year, she admitted carefully. Mostly about money. I looked up slowly. Did he ever tell you why? She nodded once. Mom kept saying the house was too expensive. She wanted Dad to sell Grandpa's lake property too. The lake property. My late husband bought that small cabin near Wisconsin almost 30 years ago. Nothing fancy. Just 2 bedrooms, old pine walls, and a fishing dock that creaked whenever Michael walked across it as a boy. My husband loved that place. Michael loved it too. Vanessa always called it outdated. Suddenly small moments from the past year returned to me differently. Vanessa insisting Michael missed Thanksgiving because of work when he later admitted they fought all morning. Vanessa casually asking me whether my name was still connected to certain family accounts. Vanessa encouraging Michael to move me into a senior living community closer to medical support. At the time I thought she was trying to help. Now every memory felt sharper, colder. Outside, the rain finally began slowing into a soft drizzle against the windows. I folded Michael's letter carefully and picked up the silver key taped behind it. Tiny numbers were engraved across the front. Safe deposit box. Grace watched my expression closely before speaking again. Grandma, she whispered. Mom does not know Dad gave me that envelope. But yesterday, I heard her tell somebody on the phone that once the paperwork clears, everything finally belongs to her. That night after Grace left, I did not turn on the television. I did not call anyone. I sat alone in my living room with Michael's letter folded neatly beside me, while the grandfather clock near the staircase marked each passing hour with a low hollow sound. The house smelled faintly like cinnamon candles and rain-soaked air drifting through the kitchen screen door. Outside, water still clung to the maple trees lining my street, making everything shimmer beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights. I kept rereading the same sentence over and over. There are things I should have handled sooner. A mother knows when her child carries guilt. Even grown men cannot fully hide it from the women who raised them. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Vanessa. Her name lit up across the screen while the room remained otherwise dark and silent. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, I said calmly. Vanessa sighed softly into the receiver, already sounding exhausted in the careful theatrical way she often did around other people. Evelyn, I just wanted to check on you, she said gently. You have been through so much this week. I stared across the room at the framed photograph of Michael on my fireplace mantel. It had been taken during a fishing trip at the lake cabin 5 summers ago. He was smiling beneath an old Chicago Bears cap, holding up a trout like a proud little boy. That is kind of you, I replied quietly. There was a small pause before Vanessa continued. I have been trying to organize paperwork all day. Insurance forms, mortgage documents, medical bills. Honestly, it is overwhelming. Her voice sharpened slightly on the last word. I said nothing. Silence has a way of making dishonest people uncomfortable. Vanessa filled it quickly. Actually, there is something practical we should probably discuss soon. Of course there was. The house is just very large now, she continued carefully. And with Grace leaving for college next year, I may need to downsize eventually. Downsize. Another polite word. Like arrangements. Like transition. I could almost hear Michael warning me through the silence between her sentences. I understand, I said softly. Vanessa seemed relieved again by my calmness. I knew you would. You have always been reasonable. Reasonable. That word lingered unpleasantly after we hung up. For years I believed keeping peace inside a family mattered more than questioning uncomfortable things. I ignored small insults because Michael looked tired from work. I overlooked Vanessa excluding me from vacations because she claimed they needed privacy. I convinced myself every cold moment had an explanation. Grief changes the shape of memory. Suddenly moments that once looked harmless begin revealing sharp edges underneath. I remembered the Christmas dinner 2 years ago when Vanessa laughed after Michael offered to repair my leaking roof himself. Your mother would survive better in a condo anyway, she joked while pouring wine. Everyone smiled awkwardly. Michael did not laugh. Another memory surfaced then. Last spring at Grace's school concert, Vanessa introduced me to another parent by saying, "This is Michael's mother. She still lives alone somehow." Somehow. Tiny words. Small cuts spread across years. Near midnight, I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept old family photographs. Underneath stacks of Christmas cards and faded birthday pictures sat the small leather-bound album from Michael's childhood. I turned pages slowly beneath the warm overhead light. Michael at 6 wearing cowboy boots too big for his feet. Michael beside my husband at the lake cabin holding a fishing pole taller than he was. Michael on graduation day with his arm around me, smiling proudly into the camera. In every picture his eyes looked kind, trusting, loyal. My throat tightened painfully again as I closed the album. Then I noticed something strange resting. Beneath it in the drawer, a folded receipt from Midwest National Bank dated 6 months earlier. Safe deposit rental fee paid in full. Michael's signature sat neatly across the bottom. The next morning I drove to Midwest National Bank with Michael's silver key resting heavily inside my coat pocket. The sky was pale and overcast, the kind of cold Illinois morning where everything feels washed of color. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot beside the brick building. Michael used to tease me for driving too slowly in bad weather even when there was no snow on the roads. "Mom, you drive like every squirrel in America is trying to cross in front of you," he would laugh. The memory almost made me smile before grief settled over me again like a heavy winter coat. Inside the bank, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Christmas decorations still hung near the teller stations even though January had already begun. A young man in a navy tie greeted me politely while I explained I needed access to a safe deposit box connected to my son's account. The moment I mentioned Michael's name, his expression shifted slightly with recognition. "One moment, Mrs. Harper," he said gently before disappearing through a side office door. A few minutes later, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached me quietly. "Mrs. Harper, I am Linda Reynolds. I worked with your son several times." She lowered her voice carefully. "He left instructions regarding this account." My pulse quickened immediately. Linda led me through a secure hallway into a small private room lined with metal lockboxes. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly while she unlocked the box with her master key before stepping back respectfully. "Take all the time you need," she said before leaving me alone. My hands shook as I inserted Michael's silver key into the lock. Inside sat several neatly organized folders, a sealed envelope with my name written across the front again, and a small flash drive resting beside them. I stared down at everything for several long seconds before reaching for the envelope first. "Mom," the letter began, "if you are here, then Vanessa probably started making decisions faster than I hoped she would." My throat tightened painfully again. "I need you to contact Daniel Mercer before discussing anything financial with her. Please promise me that." Beneath the letter sat copies of bank statements highlighted carefully in yellow marker. Large withdrawals, transfers between accounts, charges I knew Michael would never approve, designer stores, luxury travel agencies, furniture purchases worth thousands of dollars. One statement showed money taken from the lake property maintenance account only 3 days after Michael entered the hospital. I covered my mouth with my hand as the truth slowly settled inside me piece by piece. Michael had been quietly tracking everything before he died. At the bottom of the folder rested another document stamped with legal lettering across the top. Harper Family Trust. Trustee, Evelyn Harper. Beneficiary, Grace Harper. Vanessa's name appeared nowhere on the front page. I blinked hard, certain I must have misunderstood what I was reading. Michael had protected us. Quietly. Carefully. The way he always fixed broken things without announcing it to the world. Suddenly, another memory surfaced from last summer. Michael sitting alone on my back porch after dinner, staring out toward the yard while turning his wedding ring slowly around his finger. "You ever regret staying quiet too long about something?" he asked me suddenly that night. I thought he was talking about work stress. I told him marriage was complicated sometimes. He only nodded and looked away. Sitting alone inside that tiny bank room, I realized he had been asking for help without knowing how to say it directly. My eyes filled again as I carefully folded the trust papers back into the folder. Then I noticed one final item at the bottom of the box. A printed meeting notice from Daniel Mercer's law office scheduled for Friday afternoon. Tomorrow. Friday morning arrived cold and bright after nearly a week of rain. Thin sunlight stretched across my kitchen floor while I stood at the coffee maker staring out the window at bare maple branches moving gently in the wind. Everything looked strangely normal outside. A school bus stopped at the corner. Someone walked their golden retriever down the sidewalk wearing a red winter coat. Life continued moving forward while my own world still felt paused somewhere between grief and disbelief. Michael's folders sat neatly stacked beside my purse on the kitchen table. I had barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, memories kept returning in fragments. Michael teaching Grace how to drive in the empty church parking lot. Michael repainting my porch swing one summer because he said the old green color looked depressing. Michael sitting alone at my dining table last Thanksgiving, quieter than usual, while Vanessa scrolled through her phone beside him. At 10 o'clock sharp, my phone buzzed with a text message from Vanessa. "Do you want to come by later? The realtor is visiting around 3. Realtor. Again. My stomach tightened immediately. Michael had not even been buried a full week, and she was already planning showings. I typed slowly before sending my response. "I have an appointment today. Maybe another time." 3 small dots appeared instantly beneath her name as she began typing back. Then stopped. Then started again. Finally, her message arrived. "Okay. Just trying to stay organized through all this." Organized. That word felt colder every time she used it. By noon, I was driving downtown toward Daniel Mercer's office with both hands tight around the steering wheel. Snow from earlier that week still clung in gray piles along the curbs near the courthouse district. Daniel's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building with tall windows and brass directory signs near the entrance. Everything inside smelled faintly like leather chairs and old paper. His receptionist greeted me softly before leading me into a private conference room overlooking Main Street. A few minutes later, Daniel Mercer entered carrying a thick file beneath one arm. He looked older than I remembered, more tired somehow. The moment he sat down across from me, his expression softened carefully. "Mrs. Harper," he said quietly, "Michael was very concerned about you during the last few months." I folded my hands tightly together in my lap. "He left me documents," I replied. Daniel nodded slowly. I assumed he would. He opened the file in front of him and removed several papers neatly clipped together. "Your son created the Harper Family Trust 8 months ago after discovering serious financial irregularities involving joint marital accounts." Hearing those words spoken aloud made everything feel painfully real. Daniel continued carefully. "Michael wanted to ensure 2 things above all else. First, that you would always have financial security. Second, that Grace's future education and inheritance remained protected." My throat tightened. Did Vanessa know? Daniel removed his glasses briefly before answering. "No. Michael instructed me specifically not to discuss the trust until after his passing." Silence settled heavily across the room for several seconds. Outside the tall windows, people crossed the street carrying coffee cups and briefcases beneath the pale winter sun. Ordinary lives moving forward. Daniel finally slid one final document across the table toward me. "There is one more complication," he said gently. I lowered my eyes toward the page. Scheduled emergency estate review. Mandatory family attendance. Today, 4 o'clock. Vanessa Harper already confirmed. By the time I arrived back at Daniel Mercer's office that afternoon, the winter sunlight had already begun fading behind the downtown buildings. The parking garage echoed softly beneath my footsteps as I walked toward the elevator, carrying Michael's folders pressed tightly against my chest. My reflection in the mirrored elevator doors startled me briefly. I looked older than I had only a week earlier. Grief ages people quietly, not through wrinkles or gray hair, through the heaviness behind their eyes. Daniel's receptionist greeted me with a careful smile before leading me once again toward the conference room overlooking Main Street. This time the room was not empty. Vanessa sat near the far end of the polished oak table wearing a cream wool coat draped elegantly across her chair. Her posture was perfectly straight, legs crossed neatly at the ankle like she was attending a business lunch instead of an emergency estate meeting days after her husband's funeral. Beside her sat Grace, silent and pale, staring down at her hands folded tightly in her lap. Vanessa looked up immediately when I entered. Surprise flickered across her face for less than a second before her polished expression returned. "Evelyn," she said warmly, though her voice carried tension beneath it now. "I did not realize you would be here." I took the seat beside Grace without answering directly. Grace glanced toward me briefly, relief softening her expression for the first time all day. Daniel entered moments later carrying several thick legal folders beneath one arm. The room quieted immediately. He sat across from us, adjusted his glasses carefully, and folded his hands together atop the documents. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began professionally. Vanessa nodded quickly. "Of course. I have been trying to get clarity on everything since Michael passed." Her tone sounded almost rehearsed. Daniel opened the first folder slowly. "Before we discuss assets, I need to clarify that Michael Harper updated multiple legal directives approximately 8 months ago." Vanessa's expression changed slightly then. Not fear exactly. Irritation. Like someone hearing unexpected traffic delays during a trip they already planned. "Updated what exactly?" she asked carefully. Daniel remained calm. "Financial protections. Estate management instructions. Family trust restructuring." The room fell silent. I could hear the faint hum of the heating vents overhead and distant sirens somewhere outside on Main Street. Vanessa leaned back slowly in her chair. "I do not understand," she said. "Michael and I shared everything." Daniel paused briefly before continuing. "According to the legal documents signed and notarized last April, several shared accounts were removed from marital access after irregular withdrawal activity was discovered." The color drained slightly from Vanessa's face then. Very subtle. Most people would not have noticed. "I did." Grace lowered her eyes immediately toward the table. "Irregular withdrawals?" Vanessa repeated carefully. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" Daniel slid several highlighted bank statements across the table toward her. These transactions totaled over $200,000 across 11 months. Vanessa barely glanced at the pages before pushing them back lightly. "Michael knew about those purchases," she said quickly. "We discussed all financial decisions together." Nobody answered immediately. Silence spread slowly through the room like cold water. Then Daniel opened another folder. "Additionally," he continued, "Michael established the Harper Family Trust to protect designated family assets including the Wisconsin Lake property, educational funds, and primary inheritance holdings." Vanessa's jaw tightened visibly now. "Protect from who?" she asked sharply. Daniel looked directly at her. "That question would be better answered by Michael himself. Unfortunately, we only have his written instructions." Grace finally looked up then. Her voice sounded small but steady. "Dad told me he was worried." Vanessa turned toward her so quickly the movement startled everyone at the table. "Grace, this is not the time for emotional confusion." Emotional confusion. The phrase hung in the air like something sour. I watched my granddaughter shrink slightly beneath her mother's cold stare. Then Daniel quietly slid one final document across the table toward Vanessa. "Mrs. Harper," he said evenly. "Under the trust structure, Evelyn Harper has been named acting trustee effective immediately." For a long moment, nobody in the conference room spoke. Vanessa stared down at the document in front of her as if the words might rearrange themselves into something she preferred. The late afternoon sunlight coming through the tall windows had faded into a dull gray glow now, leaving the room colder than before. Grace sat motionless beside me, her fingers twisting nervously together in her lap. I could feel tension radiating from her like heat from a stove. Vanessa finally let out a short breath and forced a tight smile toward Daniel. "There has to be some misunderstanding," she said carefully. "Michael would never cut me out of decisions involving our family." Daniel remained calm. "You are still legally entitled to certain marital assets, Mrs. Harper. However, the trust itself falls under separate legal authority established solely by Michael Harper." Vanessa's expression hardened slightly then. "And Evelyn controls all of it?" she asked. The way she said my name no longer sounded polite. Daniel nodded once. "As trustee, yes." Silence settled again. I looked down at the polished wood table rather than at Vanessa directly. Part of me still could not fully absorb what was happening. Michael had spent months quietly preparing for this moment, while carrying fears he never shared aloud with me. The weight of that realization hurt more than anger ever could. Vanessa suddenly leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms tightly. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "After everything I did for him." Grace looked up immediately. "Mom," she whispered softly, almost pleading. Vanessa ignored her. "I took care of Michael through every doctor appointment, every hospital visit, every medication schedule." Her voice rose slightly with each sentence before she caught herself and lowered it again. "And now I am being treated like some kind of criminal because of a few financial transfers?" Daniel folded his hands calmly together. The concern was not only the withdrawals themselves. It was the pattern surrounding them. Vanessa laughed once under her breath, sharp and humorless. "Of course, because Michael suddenly trusted everybody except his own wife." The words echoed painfully through the room. Grace lowered her eyes again. I could see tears gathering there now. Quiet tears she was trying desperately not to let fall. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. I turned slowly toward Vanessa for the first time since the meeting began. "Michael trusted people who made him feel safe," I said quietly. My voice surprised even me. "Calm, steady." Vanessa stared at me without blinking. The room remained completely still around us. "Are you accusing me of something?" she asked softly. I shook my head once. "No. Michael already made his own decisions." Daniel gently cleared his throat before sliding another document across the table. "There is also the matter of the Wisconsin property," he explained. "Per the trust agreement, the cabin cannot be sold without trustee approval." Vanessa's face lost the last bit of color remaining in it. "What?" she whispered. Daniel continued carefully. "Additionally, educational funds for Grace are fully secured under the trust and cannot be redirected." Grace looked up sharply then, stunned. Vanessa turned toward her daughter almost immediately. "Grace, do not look at me like that," she snapped quietly. "I was trying to protect our future." But Grace did not answer. She only stared down at the table while tears slipped silently onto her folded hands. The room felt unbearably quiet after that. Outside the windows, snow had started falling again in slow soft flakes beneath the evening streetlights. Daniel finally closed the folders in front of him. "There will be additional meetings regarding remaining estate matters," he said professionally. "But for now, all trust assets remain under Evelyn Harper's authority effective immediately." Vanessa stood abruptly then, gathering her purse with stiff, controlled movements. She looked exhausted suddenly. Older somehow. Not broken. Just exposed. Before leaving the room, she paused beside Grace's chair. "We are going home," she said firmly. Grace looked up at her mother, then toward me. For the first time since the funeral, she did not stand. Grace came home with me that night. Snow drifted softly across the roads while the heater hummed inside my old Buick, and neither of us spoke much during the drive back to my house. The town looked quiet beneath the falling snow. Storefront lights glowed warmly against the dark streets, and families hurried into restaurants carrying scarves and shopping bags as if the world had not completely changed for us only days earlier. Grace sat beside me staring silently out the passenger window with Michael's eyes fixed on the passing lights. Every now and then she wiped at her cheeks quickly before another tear could fall. I did not pressure her to talk. Grief sounds different in young people. Sometimes it arrives as anger, sometimes silence. When we reached my house, the porch light cast a soft yellow circle across the snow-covered steps. Inside, the warmth smelled faintly like coffee and cinnamon from the candle I forgot to blow out earlier that morning. Grace slipped off her boots quietly near the door before looking around the living room. Her gaze stopped on the framed photograph of Michael above the fireplace. "Dad loved this house," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "He painted that wall himself when he was 23, I said softly. "Terrible job, too. Took him 3 weekends to fix the edges." For the first time all week, Grace smiled a little. Small, tired, real. Later that evening, we sat together at the kitchen table eating canned tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches because neither of us had energy for anything more complicated. Snow continued falling outside the windows while the old radio near the counter played soft jazz quietly in the background. The house no longer felt empty the way it had after the funeral. Sad, yes, but not empty. Grace finally looked up from her bowl. "Grandma," she asked carefully, "are you angry at Mom?" I set my spoon down gently before answering. The question deserved honesty. "I think your mother spent a long time wanting a life that always felt just out of reach," I said quietly. Sometimes people become so focused on what they believe they deserve that they stop seeing the people standing beside them. Grace stared down at the table for several seconds. "Dad was unhappy for a while," she admitted softly. I knew it. I just pretended not to. My chest tightened hearing that. Children notice far more than adults realize. I reached across the table and covered her hand gently with mine. "None of this is your fault," I whispered. Grace nodded faintly, though tears still filled her eyes again. After dinner, she helped me wash the dishes, and for a few brief moments the ordinary rhythm of warm water, clinking plates, and folded towels made life feel almost normal again. Almost. Before bed, I walked into the hallway and paused outside the guest room where Grace had already fallen asleep beneath one of my old quilt blankets. Snowlight reflected softly through the curtains across her face. She looked younger sleeping, more like the little girl who used to chase fireflies at the lake cabin while Michael grilled hamburgers near the dock. I stood there quietly for a long moment before returning to the living room alone. Michael's photograph still rested above the fireplace, his smile frozen forever somewhere between kindness and exhaustion. I sat down slowly in my armchair and looked at him through the dim light of the room. "You knew," I whispered softly into the silence. Maybe that was the hardest part of grief. Realizing the people we love carry burdens we never fully see until it is too late to help them carry those burdens anymore. But Michael had done one final thing before he left this world. He protected the people who truly loved him. Outside, snow continued falling.